Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. My name is Perryn Keys, joined today by Wilson Alexander in our top right corner. He's our lead LSU football beat reporter. And, of course, by Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist. He's old enough to remember when LSU used to have offensive problems when they faced Wisconsin all the way back in 2016 at Lambeau Field. Those days have come and gone, with or without Jayden Daniels. Rad's doing the Brady Bunch thing.
We did it's like the Brady Bunch thing. Yes.
Yeah.
I was feeling. I'm so glad you did that because I felt like this is the exact same. We've had our professional studio, and now we're taking the show on the road because Rab and I are in Tampa, and I felt the exact same thing. It's like we're back in the Brady Bunch again with the
Yes, this is going to be. We apologize to everybody who's tuning in. Usually getting crystal clear voices and a much more enjoyable display and much more enjoyable set and some back and forth. But we are obviously doing this thing a little bit on the fly, and we will go from there. We will do everything we need to do. We are here to break down, obviously, the Badgers and Tigers. We're going to get it on here at 11 a.m. Monday in Tampa, Florida, where Scott and Wilson both are. So, but first, a little bit of business. We will tell you, of course, to subscribe to The Advocate. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Please sign up for the LSU newsletter. That's the daily newsletter, but Rab handles that 3 times a week. You can stay up to date with all of the headlines surrounding the LSU football program, baseball, basketball, gymnastics, softball, everything. To get the Advocate's newsletter, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here typically every Monday and Thursday in much better sound and much better picture. On Monday and Thursday, live on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you don't catch us live there, obviously you can catch us after the fact. If you don't catch us either live or after the fact on YouTube, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. And finally, please get a hold of some championship posters at the Advocate store. To do that, you go to store.theadvocate.com and you enter the code INSIDER for 15% off your purchase. One last thing I should say, we are brought to you, as always, by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL, financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. To learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. So, gentlemen, you all have a full plate of Columbia restaurant food in your belly. You have been to all the press conferences. You've covered everything there is to cover at this point, leading up to the Tigers and Badgers. I think first and foremost, the one thing we haven't covered, since we all broke for Christmas, and happy holidays out there to everybody, incidentally. The one thing we haven't covered on this podcast, though, is Mike Denbrock. He obviously, we thought he had come to an agreement. They had come to an agreement to stay at LSU, but then he decided that maybe a place where he'd worked twice before was a better place for him, and likely a little bit of offer that came with it. Wilson, if you just want to sort of reset everything that's happened with Mike Denbrock and where we go from here.
Absolutely. Obviously it's very relevant for this bowl game because Sloan and Cortez Hankton will be co-offensive coordinators, and we learned a little bit more about that, how that was going to work today from Brian Kelly. But that's all happened, like you said, because Mike Denbrock has gone to Notre Dame. As everyone, I think, can remember, on December 6th, Denbrock and LSU verbally agreed to a 3-year contract extension. That was after Texas A&M pursued him and reportedly was going to make him the top-paid offensive coordinator coordinator in either offense or defense in the entire country. LSU was able to get him back. The exact financial figures of what that deal was going to look like are unknown, partly because Denbrock never signed it. So, we often file public records requests around LSU, especially when there's contracts or term sheets, which is usually what you would have gotten in this scenario, was a term sheet that would then need to be finalized by LSU's Board of Supervisors. And at that point, when it would get to the Board of Supervisors, it's just a formality, really. But Denbrock never even signed the agreement that they had. And so, that never bound him to anything. And it exponentially reduced his buyout. which was a factor for Notre Dame when they were looking for an offensive coordinator last year. They had some targets that they couldn't end up getting because of some issues with the buyouts, and that wasn't a problem here. And so, it sounds like Notre Dame offered him maybe a 4-year deal. This is according to Football Scoop, worth quite a bit of money in that sort of $2 million range. And so a year range. And so, he ends up going back to Notre Dame, informed LSU last week that was going to be the case. Josh Williams said that they had a team meeting and Denbrock told the team, and Josh really appreciated how that was handled, in a very professional manner. And now Mike Denbrock is on to Notre Dame and going to be the offensive coordinator there. And, he's not like sticking with LSU through the bowl game or anything. This will be Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton getting a shot to maybe be the offensive coordinators moving forward, or one of them maybe be the offensive coordinator moving forward. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the offense looks schematically. There's some differences, maybe not. The playbook isn't drastically different, but the person who is sort of looking at that playbook and choosing what to pick from it, that is different. And you've also got different quarterbacks, a different skill set. But it could be very well an audition, especially for Joe Sloan, to be maybe the offensive coordinator moving forward. Although both of them could end up receiving elevated roles. We'll kind of see how that plays out after the bowl game. At least in this one, that's how it's going to work.
Rab, obviously Brian Kelly broke this down, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday today at his press conference. Can you walk us through how this is going to work with Hankton and Sloan? Who's going to be doing what? Who is situated where? Who's calling the plays and so forth?
Yeah, Wilson, check me if I'm incorrect, but I think Joe Sloan's in the press box and Cortez Hankton's on the field. This is a traditional role. And so it sounds like the plays will come down from the press box and get from Sloan, and you will get sent out onto the field by Hankton and the other staff members. And Brian Kelly made a point. I thought it was a little amusing that, I'm going to, be listening in to see, if I'm, what they call, and obviously he gets veto power on those things. So it sounds like Joe Sloan will be doing most of the play calling, but they'll be collaborating. They've kind of divvied up responsibilities between themselves and the other offensive staff members who are still there to kind of delegate some authority. Joe is more running game and pass protection, and Cortez is more pass plays, the
route
passing
concepts
game
and that kind of thing. He already has the title of passing game coordinator, so that kind of lines up with what he is his area of expertise. And Joe, of course, will be working with Garrett very closely at quarterback.
So it's kind of what you expect. I mean, I think, if we're being honest, I would think Joe Sloan is probably the guy who's got a little more of a chance to be the next offensive coordinator. Brian Kelly stays in house to do that, so this would tend to lend you towards that, but clearly they want to hold on to both of them. And look, it's like Jayden Daniels leaving, not playing in the bowl game, though we found out he's definitely going to be here, according to Greg Penn, going to be here for the game. It's not what you want. It's not ideal. It's not, it's never great when people leave, especially after you've had such a prolific offense as LSU has had this year. But these are two guys someone's going to make them their offensive coordinator eventually. They're going to get a chance somewhere, and they're both known as really good recruiters. And I think in the long term, if they can be adept at play calling and crafting an offense, this could be something that is in the long term a positive for LSU. They're both a lot younger than Mike Denbrock, and they potentially have more shelf life to be on your staff. And they're both really good recruiters. And Denbrock was not known as much of a recruiter, so there are some pluses to counteract the short-term minuses, in my opinion.
That you lead me into my next sort of subtopic there, Rab, which is to say, I know you feel a certain way about this, and I'll just sort of tee you up with that in mind. Does LSU risk losing Joe Sloan and or Cortez Hankton if they don't get promoted after this bowl game long-term to the coordinator role? And for that matter, let's say one of them gets promoted and the other one doesn't. How do you navigate that? Do you expect to lose one or both of those coaches if something like that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded that Brian Kelly started his professional life in politics, and he said, "This is a political situation." Let's be honest; it is a brand of politics. Yeah, whoever doesn't get the job, assuming you go with one, and you should go with one, not two. I remember LSU one year had co-defensive coordinators in 2008, and that didn't work well.
That did not work well.
No, it didn't, and that lasted 1 year, and then Les Miles switched back. So you risk the guy who doesn't get it, getting his feelings hurt or finding a better opportunity and going somewhere else. But that's the price you pay. I mean, you want assistant coaches. You hear a lot of coaches say this. You want assistant coaches who have ambitions and eventually maybe want to be head coaches themselves. I think Mike Denbrock struck me as someone who's a career assistant. I don't think he's going from Notre Dame to a head coaching job at his age, but who knows? But that definitely could happen. And you got to weigh those factors. But I think if I don't know how Brian Kelly feels about them as play callers or people who can craft an offense. They certainly don't have Mike Denbrock's experience. I mean, then that's not going to be a thing, but it's something that's worth strongly considering. And he said this is kind of an audition for both of them in this job. But if I had to guess, I would think Joe Sloan is more likely to get the offensive coordinator job. Now that he's a lock to get it. I don't know how much it depends on what the offense looks like against Wisconsin or not, but it's going to all be a factor, and we're going to see how it works out and see if he can retain both of them, because that could be hard. That could be hard in the long run.
One point about the co-coordinators thing is just to remember, say this is more so hypothetical, if LSU were to go in that direction where it promotes internally and elevates both Cortez and Joe, to more of to have maybe heightened roles in the formation of the game plan and kind of become an offensive brain trust, is think back to 2019. LSU, Steve Ensminger is the offensive coordinator and the only person with that title, but Joe Brady's the passing game coordinator, and they collaborated quite a bit. So there are examples of it working in certain situations. It just kind of has to be clearly delegated what everybody's roles is, and they have to work well together and mesh. Part of what made that so effective was that Steve Ensminger didn't have some massive ego that he needed to be. He was willing to share, and right. That helped make it work so well. And so it is possible to have a good team and a good offensive scheme with that sort of setup if LSU wanted to go in that direction. Because, Cortez, like we said, already has the title of passing game coordinator. Maybe you give Joe the title of offensive coordinator and you go from there. But that's getting ahead of ourselves because none of that has been finalized or decided. But this is, as we said, a good opportunity for Joe and Cortez to show what they can do. Brian Kelly was asked, very specifically earlier this week, could Joe kind of be a candidate for this? And he said that it would be foolish, were his words, not to look internally, at least to consider it and evaluate it especially after LSU had the top offense in the country. So it's certainly something that's going through his mind, and then he'll be able to make a more, a final decision after LSU gets through this bowl game.
So we know who is there in terms of the coaching staff, at least for now. Let's talk about who is there on the sideline, who's there on the, filling out uniforms for LSU. We can discuss, Wilson and I, before the show began, we're discussing Florida State and Georgia down in the Orange Bowl. Florida State's had mass, defections since they got jobbed, in my opinion, out of the 14 playoff. That really hasn't, and we've seen that, of course, throughout, not all the rest of these non-playoff bowls. So many people opting out and deciding to enter either the transfer portal or begin preparing for the NFL draft. So that largely, of course, Jayden Daniels is the one, the major defection, and that was certainly expected and not a surprise. And I don't think anybody particularly holds that against them. Holds that against him, as we've discussed many times. But by and large, LSU is bringing a largely intact roster to Tampa. Wilson, can you just sort of break that down for us?
It's honestly not even all that much to break down because, like you said, it's going to look very similar to what the roster was for the season finale, the regular season finale against Texas A&M. Other than Jayden Daniels not playing, you've pretty much got every other starter out there on the field. Will Campbell didn't practice today, Friday, because he has the flu, Brian Kelly said. That's what I'd heard as well, is that he had an illness, but he's expected to play, on Monday, in the ReliaQuest Bowl and still be out there. And so that's your whole starting offensive line is practicing. You've got your 2,000-yard receivers in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. You've got Logan Diggs practicing again. And Brian Kelly said that he looks more like he did before he was kind of injured and dealing with some injury stuff kind of down to the last month of the season and wasn't playing as often. as he had early in the year. But you've also got, in addition to him, Josh Williams and Noah Cain there at running back. You've even got your two freshmen, Trey Holly and Caleb Jackson are available. You got all your tight ends other than Jackson McGowan, who transferred. And the one notable absence really on the offensive side, other than Jayden, is that Lance Hurd is not here. The 5-star offensive tackle, the freshman, did not travel with the team. He is not in Tampa, is not expected to suddenly arrive in Tampa. Brian Kelly said that Lance is basically evaluating his spot at LSU and kind of, what his future is going to be, which, he hasn't officially entered the transfer portal yet or anything like that, but it sounds like maybe that is on his mind. It's something he's thinking through. Is he going to, stay at LSU or not, basically? And Brian Kelly said that conversations with Hurd and his family will sort of have been kind of started and are going to really resume after the bowl game. But right now they're sort of focused on who's currently here with the team. And on the defensive side, you got just about everybody who was there, at least for that regular season finale against Texas A&M. Juice Chestnut and Denver Harris officially transferred this week, but they haven't been with the team for 2+ months. LaTerrence Welch already transferred, but he was a backup, so it doesn't really affect who you're going to see on the field. They've actually gained players really in a way with Mekhi Wingo coming back from an injury. He's practicing. He's going to play after missing the last 5 games of the season with a core muscle injury. And so, he's coming back to play in this game, even though it might be his last LSU game if he decides to go to the NFL. So you got pretty much everybody on the defensive side, from the front 4, all the way back, who you kind of had there toward the end of the season. And it looks like one thing of note that Javian Toviano and Ashton Stamps are in line to start at cornerback. They had both started 2 games apiece at the end of the season, that last month of the season, and they've been the first-team corners here throughout practice from what we've been able to see. Sage Ryan kind of rotating with them at some, but it looks like Sage, even we saw a glimpse of it today, was at nickel, which was kind of the position that he had played more so in his career before he was moved out to cornerback. Although Brian Kelly had mentioned it at one time here just last week with the group of cornerbacks. So that's kind of what you've seen on the defensive side and on the offensive side, and it's a lot of the same pieces. Other than obviously at Jayden Daniels, they're not being there at quarterback.
Rab, what do you make of this? So many teams and frankly, this is where you and I probably differ a little bit, which is to say, if somebody wants to hit the road and either enter the transfer portal or forgo the bowl game and start preparing for the draft, hey, God bless. It's a free country. Do what you want. If anybody can make another dollar or do what's best for themselves, I don't think anybody should stand in the way. All that having been said, certainly some high. How many first-round draft picks elsewhere are actually going to play in their bowl? Projected first-round draft picks, guys like Malik Neighbors and potentially Brian Thomas being also a first-round pick. What do you make out of this?
Yeah, Brian Kelly addressed that today, and he said, particularly those 2 guys, Thomas and Neighbors, and he said, they're 90% guys who really want to play for their teams, and then 10% they just love playing football. And he said you gotta love playing football. So I think Kelly, everybody's wondering about his recruiting ability and his this and that. They've done a great job of retaining players and getting to play in a game that is, look, let's be honest, it's pretty much an exhibition now. It's not the college football playoff, right? It's a game a lot of guys can say, I'm not coming back. And we spoke to Greg Penn. He got an award from the ReliaQuest Bowl people. And I asked him about that, and he said, there's a real team bond that they want to play with. It sounds a little corny. It certainly sounds a little old-fashioned for today's modern football, but they've got these guys to buy in and say. And of course, Malik Neighbors, let's not forget, he mentioned after the Texas A&M game, he wants the LSU career receiving record, and he's got, he's maybe one good catch away from breaking that career record. So, but I think it speaks well for LSU that, in terms of their overall team stability, chemistry is probably the wrong word. Just where they are as a program that these guys have kind of bought in. It was something we said last year about Brian Kelly getting players to buy in. Remember, he said after they got blown up by Tennessee, somehow that things kind of clicked, and of course they went on a strong run towards the end of the season and ended up clinching the SEC West, and then they won 10 games when they won the Citrus Bowl against Purdue. And they seem to have something similar going again this year. Yeah, Jayden Daniels, that's not a surprise. Heisman Trophy winner. He's elevated himself from maybe even a third day draft guy, Wilson, certainly a second day guy, to being top half of the first round. And so that's not a surprise. It would have been nice to see him play, but again, in the long run, it's better for LSU, for Garrett Nussmeier to get this experience. But it's you still want to win the game too, and they got these guys who could say I'm out, and for the most part they have not, and I think it speaks well for LSU going forward. Yeah, some of these guys, they certainly expect Neighbors and Thomas are playing their last game, but the last game could have been Texas A&M, and I think it's great that we're going to see them out there. And as an old-fashioned college football fan, it warms my heart a little bit to say that these guys are playing, for what are the traditional reasons. They just want to play and they want to be with their teammates one more time, and then they're going to go off to seek fame and fortune in the NFL. And that's it's a nice thing to see, and I think it's certainly helps LSU's chances of winning this game and getting to 10 wins and establishing that the two back-to-back year foundation. That 10 wins is important. It shows stability and shows that you're potentially building towards something better as they expand the college football playoff next year.
This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at The Advocate. Please subscribe to The Advocate, whether that's our print edition or our digital edition or some sort of combination of both. Please subscribe. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Stay up to date with all the LSU news there. Get it delivered there to your desktop, to your inbox, to your phone with the LSU newsletter. To sign up for the LSU newsletter, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here on the LSU Sports Insider typically every Monday and Thursday on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you don't catch us live there on Mondays and Thursdays, you can always catch us after the fact on those same social channels and YouTube channel. And if you don't catch us there, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Please, one more note: the holidays are over, but it doesn't mean you can't decorate with some LSU championship posters and with the Jayden Daniels Heisman poster, for that matter. You go to the store at The Advocate. That's store.theadvocate.com. And to get 15% off, you enter the code INSIDER, INSIDER. We are brought to you every Monday and Thursday by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. So, gentlemen, we've gotten a good 20 minutes in here, and we're sort of missing the star of the show so far, and that's Garrett Nussmeier. He's going to get his star turn. As QB1 at LSU. This is something he's obviously redshirted for, waited for, bided his time, and waited his turn. And so now the hour is almost upon us. Wilson, how does Garrett Nussmeier look, and what do you expect to see out of him on Monday?
We'll expect to see a version that's maybe a little bit more confident, carrying himself a little bit differently, because has known now for a few weeks that he's going to be the starter. And that affects the way you prepare, because as a backup, Brian Kelly said today, you can get away with some things that you can't really get away with as a starter. And although Garrett has said that he is always prepared as if he's going to play, many games have passed where the clock hit zero and he never saw the field. And even though for him, all that really mattered was, LSU winning the game, it was hard on him over the last few years, not playing very much and having so many games when he did not get on the field. And so for him to finally be having this chance is a little bit emotional for him. He's just really excited. It's kind of a reward of his trust, his patience, his faith. He leaned on that quite a bit. Said they learned a lot about, patience in this process, and, sort of humbling himself and trying to get better, even though he wasn't on the field. And so now we kind of see the fruit of that labor, and it's paying off for him with this first career start. In terms of what we expect to see out of him, I expect to probably see something that's somewhat similar to kind of the end of the season last year, against Georgia in the SEC championship and against Purdue in the Citrus Bowl, when he was airing it out and doing so with a good deal of success. We barely saw him this year, and even when we did, he was just sort of thrown into really a difficult situation. And if he had, really popped like in that fourth quarter against Alabama, then that would have been a great data point. But I don't really hold it against him that he didn't play great in that scenario. He would have liked some throws back. There was a fourth down drop by Malik Neighbors that would have kept the drive alive. He didn't make great decisions, but that was also a pretty tough scenario to be thrown into. And even though he didn't play well, I look more toward the end of last season to maybe be representative of what we see out of Garrett, especially with so many weeks to prepare. LSU's players have all said, and you've seen it yourself, and they back it up with, Garrett's going to air it out. He's going to test some throws that Jayden maybe didn't even try because he has a lot of belief in his arms. And sometimes that can get him in trouble. But when it's harnessed properly, it makes him really, really effective. And so I think this offense is going to be continuing to throw the ball vertically downfield. It's something that Wisconsin has done a pretty good job of stopping the second half of the year, that LSU has been extremely effective at. And it might be, LSU is probably going to try to maintain that in a lot of ways. Josh Williams said yesterday to us that Garrett is a little bit faster than people give him credit for. He's been clocked in like the 20-mile-an-hour range. But that looks slow when you're next to Jayden Daniels, who runs like a gazelle. But Josh is like, people don't give Garrett enough credit now. He can run. So we might see still a little bit more of the zone reads that LSU did a lot this year. But I wouldn't expect to see many, design quarterback runs that you sometimes have with Jayden Daniels. Because Garrett, is more of a little bit more of a pocket passer. He can move around to get himself into better positions to throw, but he's not a statue by any means. But I do think the way the offense is called is going to be a little bit different in this game to try to tailor it to Garrett's strengths.
Rab, what does Garrett Nussmeier? Obviously, AJ Swan is coming in, a Vanderbilt transfer. He'll be here soon, but not for this game. But he will be here soon. Expected to at least give depth, if not competition, to Garrett Nussmeier as LSU goes down the road next season. In your mind, what does Garrett Nussmeier need to do in this game to sort of cement himself and establish himself as QB1?
Yeah, first of all, Brian Kelly mentioned AJ Swan in the press conference today, saying that he's going to have a chance. In a similar vein to what Garrett Nussmeier had a chance against Jayden Daniels, and he said Jayden just proved to be better. We all expect that Garrett Nussmeier will be the starter when LSU opens the season against USC in Las Vegas. But what does he have to do? I think he's got to show some growth. He's like Wilson mentioned. When he came in last year, he was he kind of embraces the role, the moniker of being the gunslinger. But I think you have to be more than that as a starting quarterback in the SEC. I'm going to be interested to see, does he pick his spots? Does he maybe not try to throw the ball into these really tight little windows? Because they're going against a good defense. Wisconsin's 18th in the country in scoring defense. They've only given up more than 24 points one time. That was to Washington State back in September. It's a good defense, and LSU, if they can get in the 30s, you think even the state of their defense, they're gonna win. So you got to be productive. You got to move the chains. You got to show some leadership. And I tell you, I don't know if Wilson would agree or not, but in the two times we've talked to Garrett leading up to this game, yesterday and back in Baton Rouge, I hear someone who's kind of a cross between Jayden Daniels and Joe Burrow. I think there's some humbleness, but there's someone who's very confident in his ability and thinks he's deserved and is ready for this chance. And I think he's going to make the most of it. And I think that's showing that you're more than just a guy with a strong arm. That's showing that you're a guy who can lead the team and run the offense. And Brian Kelly mentioned, he said he's been a different guy in the building, since before, the building being, I think the LSU football building, and then I don't know that's much the team hotel here in Tampa, but the quarterback naturally is a position that is supposed to be someone that the players want to follow, and he seems to have that. It's kind of a undefinable quality, but he seems to have that charisma that maybe is one area where he's ahead of Jayden Daniels, certainly at this stage of his career. So that's going to be very interesting. Is he going to be able to get those guys to line up and do the right things? Is he going to be able to choose somebody out if they make a mistake? And get them to listen and say, don't do that again. And is he going to, maybe throttle back on his ability to, like I said, throw the ball in a tight window when it's best for the team not to do that, or throw the ball away, or check down, or run. So I'm looking forward to see that growth, because we haven't seen it. Like I said before in the podcast, he didn't throw as much this year as he did all of last year. Jayden got shaken up in a couple of games, and there was the Georgia game, which was a blowout. And they said to go ahead and they're going to play him some more. And Jayden, I think, was shaken up in that game too. And then there were a couple other instances. So I think we're going to see a more mature Garrett Nussmeier. And we need to, because as Brian said, there's a lot of pressure on him, and he didn't shy away from saying that, and it's absolutely true.
He definitely does have that charisma, Rab, that you mentioned. And in terms of, one thing just to kind of keep in mind about Garrett is, he hasn't had to lead the way that Jayden has had to lead this year in particular. And one of the things that LSU worked with on Jayden in the offseason was being a little bit more vocal. That's not something that ever came naturally to him. Garrett kind of already has that in him a little bit. We just we haven't seen it applied necessarily publicly. But it has been applied privately in some ways because he's one of their SWAT team leaders. LSU's got about 10 guys who are part of these summer workout accountability teams, and those get maintained through the season. You see him at the very front, and all of those guys stand at the front of the stretch lines that LSU has pregame. And Garrett and at practice. And Garrett is one of those guys who's up at the front of the line. He's one of those SWAT team leaders. He's somebody who's sort of been in that position of leadership in this program, even though he hasn't been the starting quarterback yet. And so I don't think that will be too problematic for him. Just one thing that I would refute Garrett embracing the gunslinger label is that he actually is not. I remember in an interview, this was probably sometime last year with Garrett, maybe in spring practice. The whole thing was that he was trying to shed that label. He doesn't want to be known as a gunslinger because he doesn't want to have that association with making bad decisions. And that's something that he'll be able to prove in this game and then maybe in the next season as well, is that he is taking care of the football, which is an important trait for quarterbacks to have.
I'm trying to think of a similar situation here in recent LSU history, where a guy has had to wait his turn to be the quarterback. And
Miles.
I thought we were seeing that with Miles Brennan.
Miles, yeah.
And it didn't work out for Miles Brennan in the long run. I mean, he was the starter in 2020, but then he got hurt, in September, and it just didn't work out for him in the long run. And then he got hurt again, and finally just quit football. Zach Mettenberger waited behind Jordan Jefferson and Jarrett Lee in 2011 for his turn to be the starting quarterback the next year, but he was a transfer coming in. This is a guy who's been there all the time. So I think, to me, it reminds me of Matt Flynn waiting behind Jamarcus Russell, a guy who came there and waited and waited and waited for his chance. It's different to be a transfer and wait, like Mettenberger was. But this is more like Miles Brennan. And like I said, it didn't work out for Miles. But this is similar to that situation that Jamarcus Russell didn't win the Heisman Trophy, but he was the number 1 overall draft pick, a very talented, highly regarded quarterback. And obviously you're trying to fill the shoes. So that was some big shoes to fill. And how did he fill them? He filled them by leading LSU to a national championship. And I'm not saying Garrett Nussmeier has to do that or will do that. I mean, there's a long way. LSU's got to do a lot of developing and improving to get to be a national championship contender for next season, in my opinion. But it's a similar situation in that he's paid his dues, and I think he feels deserving of this opportunity. And that just comes from confidence. He told us yesterday, he said he's always been a quarterback, right? Even going back to, as long as he's started football, he was the quarterback, and didn't play any other positions. And so I think he feels he's earned this, and this is his time in what he considers his home state, his home state school, and all those things. And I don't think we've seen a situation exactly like this in a long time. It's a very interesting dynamic at play with Garrett Nussmeier. And we're going to see if he can thrive in it or if it's going to be a struggle for him. And we're going to start to find out in this game on Monday against, like I said, a quality defense that will certainly prepare him. It's going to serve him well going into the 24 season to have played this game, win or lose.
So we've discussed the LSU roster sort of top to bottom. Let's take stock of the Badgers. They're obviously breaking in a new coach, as we've discussed many times, Luke Fickell. The Badgers went outside the family for the first time really since they hired Barry Alvarez back in 1990. Since then, since Barry Alvarez, I was thinking about this as in some ways he stayed at Wisconsin and is still there really much longer than Nick Saban did at LSU, obviously. But in many ways, they sort of are the two faces of each program that really turn those things around. Rab, I can see you.
From a depth chart.
Okay, but you're sort of rooting around for stuff. But I was just going to ask you if that makes a lot of sense. You know, the Badgers were coming that they had a coach named Don Morton who was awful. The Badgers were terrible. I mean, the program I couldn't put into words just how down bad that program was. And they hired Barry Alvarez in 1990, and he really he altered the course of that program, the entire program, and it's been a winner since he has left. And it's going through, as I said, they're going through quite a transition here with Luke Fickell, who was hired outside the family. He was obviously very successful at Cincinnati, but he's installing a new offense. He did install a new offense. Hired coordinator Phil Longo, and they've gone through it. They had an injury to their starting quarterback Tanner Mordecai, but they just they didn't have the personnel, I think, to really run sort of the air raid principles and a much more wide open offense than what we've seen from the Badgers the last 30 odd years. 75th in total offense, but they've got a stout defense. Just tell me what you expect out of these guys and what you expect to see from the Badgers defense first, and then having to defend an offense in flux.
Is it unfair to say the Badgers? They don't really say that up there. Does it really?
It's not quite. It's not quite that harsh, but it's close. It's
harsh.
Close. Yeah.
Harsh.
For about, not that anybody cares, but I moved here many years ago from Wisconsin, and I
wasn't going to say, but yes,
I don't have that accent anymore. But I believe I had that accent when I moved here, and I was teased mercilessly and had it coming. So, but anyway, I'm sorry, Rab. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Fickell went in there and. Like you said, it's a departure for Wisconsin, right? Yeah, it's a departure for the coach they hired and the kind of offense he wants to run, right? He wants to be more wide open, less, traditional Big Ten football, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of thing that you think of, Ron Dane in Wisconsin, right? You think of Wisconsin offense, that's generally the kind of offense you think of, right? Is somebody like a big physical running back. It's physical. Right. Sorry?
I said I think of offensive linemen first. And everything else,
right? And I was saying a couple of the LSU players we talked to mentioned that watching Wisconsin on tape, they see a big physical offensive line, and that's pretty typical. But Fickell wants to branch out offensively and more modernize their attack, and it's not quite the personnel that they have. It's his first year, right? He came over from Cincinnati, like Brian Kelly used to coach at Cincinnati. And it's going to take a little time. So I think they've done probably about as well as they could do to get to 7-5 and play in this bowl game. One of the bigger bowl games for a Big Ten team. But defensively, they're also physical and they play good defense. I see on the numbers 31st in total defense, 18th in scoring defense. They just don't give up a lot. I assume they're pretty textbook, tackling team, and don't make a lot of mistakes. So that's something that LSU is going to have to overcome with this offense. I think one of the players mentioned, I would imagine it's certainly true, that LSU will have a speed advantage over Wisconsin, and that's something they can play to their advantage. But it's going to be it's a game LSU should still win without Jayden Daniels, without Mike Denbrock, but they're going to have to earn it a little bit because we've seen LSU play Wisconsin a couple of times in the recent past, had to rally from way back to beat them in Houston in 2015, and then lost the game at Lambeau Field in Green Bay in 2016, and that kind of greased the skids for Les Miles to end his career. And by the way, they played back in the 70s, home and home. Wisconsin and LSU played, and LSU's quarterback was a number 5, a guy named Mike Miley, Miracle Mike Miley, who was a runner and a thrower and a scrambler, and ended up playing Major League Baseball. And so that was another number 5 from way back in the day. But it's a typical Wisconsin team, but then in a way it's not. They're trying to evolve, and LSU's catching them early in the process when it's to Wisconsin's detriment a little bit. But it's still not a team to be overlooked if LSU overlooks them at their peril.
Not to overlook them in particular because of what they as we've mentioned, have been able to do defensively this season. Holding everybody other than Washington State in week 2 to under 30 points. Was Ohio State, which is probably, at least in terms of talent level, most similar to LSU in terms of who Wisconsin has faced on their schedule, only scored 24 points. Now Ohio State did not have the kind of offense that LSU had this season. Jayden Daniels was certainly much better than Kyle McCord at quarterback, but they still, have a lot of talent, like we said. And now you've got an LSU offense that doesn't even have Jayden Daniels. So what's going to be fascinating is to see how much LSU can still generate explosive plays. That was such an engine and catalyst for this offense this season. Jayden, as everyone I think knows at this point, had 90 of them by himself. But Wisconsin has done a really good job of limiting that, especially in the second half of the season. They've only given up 7 plays of 40 yards or more. That's 10th in the country. They're 21st in the country in 30-yard plays allowed, and tied for 17th in terms of 10 and 20-plus yard plays allowed. So they've given up some, but not a lot. And certainly they said, talking to some of their players, Luke Fickell, back when this bowl was first announced, they said that in the second half of the season they've been much better in that regard in particular. And so that's going to be one of the fascinating things to see in this game, especially because of what Garrett Nussmeier is as a quarterback, and having that change there and having to change it offensive coordinator that we've already talked about is if LSU can continue to generate that explosive plays downfield, because you run into trouble sometimes a little bit. At least you're more susceptible to it maybe if you were trying to extend drives and sustain them for a long period of time. And so that's just going to be a fascinating, I think, element of this game, and something that this game really hinges on. As long as Garrett can sort of be that point guard and just get the ball to guys on the outside like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Kyron Lacey, because he's got so much of the offensive structure still in place around him, then I feel like LSU is going to be okay. But it's something to certainly monitor, because that's what Wisconsin's strength has been.
One of the things. Go ahead, Rab.
I'm sorry. I think the way this game is going to play out in my mind is that LSU is going to have more empty possessions than we're used to seeing. They're averaging over 46 points a game. They can't help but have a few more than they have this year. But they're just so adept at hitting the big play. They're going to hit some. Wisconsin's not going to be able to foul off every 100-mile-an-hour pitch, right? The LSU's going to they're going to get. Huh?
We're mixing sports here now.
Yeah, you got to mix it up a little bit. We're kind of approaching that transition time, with LSU athletics and on the calendar, but they're not going to be able to stop every single thing. No one has all year, and I have respect for Wisconsin's defense and the defense they've played this year, but it's not. They probably haven't seen an offense like LSU's either. So it's going to be a huge challenge for Wisconsin to stop. They can, more power to them, but I think Garrett Nussmeier will find those. And as Brian said, Malik Neighbors, you don't have to throw a 50-yard pass for him to have a 50-yard play. You can throw a 12-yard pass, and then he takes off for another 38. He's so great after the catch that's going to happen at some point.
One last thing before we get you out of here with get you two guys out of here with game predictions. This is something we actually kind of brought up when we were discussing all these players who haven't opted out for LSU. I'll just get each of your takes on just how much does this game matter? We've discussed this so many times now that bowl games that aren't part of the playoff are really, they feel more like exhibitions or more like pre-spring more than postseason. But obviously LSU has discussed ad nauseum, and certainly Brian Kelly has discussed ad nauseum about getting to 10 wins, about how important that is. I'll just put it to you each, and I'll let you go first, Wilson. Just how much does this game mean, and how much should it mean?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd put it at about a 6. This matters for, I think, maybe more like being able to talk in the off season in a more positive way. If you finish 10-3 and have back-to-back 10-win seasons and a Heisman winner, then the next 7 months become a lot more, I think, probably easier to maybe be able to push a message of growth and improvement heading into the third year under Brian Kelly. And so in that regard, I'd say it's somewhat important. And also in terms of what you're able to pitch to recruits and sell in living rooms and stuff like that, it's important. it's because it's rarely done around here, to have back-to-back 10-win seasons. And so that certainly is I think an accomplishment that is worthy of pursuing and trying to get. And so that would give it a little bit of importance. But at the same time, if they don't win this game, it's not really the end of the world. It's not going to have a major effect on what's happening in 2024. It's probably not going to have a major effect on recruiting or anything that we're talking about that could be a positive. I also don't think it's going to really weigh all those things down incredibly. Maybe people feel a little bit more angsty if you've gone 10-4 to 9-4, and maybe, and all the problems that they had defensively this season. But if you're able to sort of show that sign of stability and improvement and growth, and then that is a good thing. And it just kind of makes the offseason a little bit easier if you're Brian Kelly and the rest of this team. And it's also, I think it does seem important internally to them. As we were talking about, all these guys playing in this game, they want to play, and for various reasons. I mean, for Malik Neighbors, there is that little bit of, individual wanting to break that record. And Brian Kelly's that's okay, because that's not really the only reason either. He didn't have to do any convincing of Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas to play in this game. They just wanted to play in this game. And, all these defensive players are playing this game. Kai Wingo coming back from the injury to play in this game. And, Brian Kelly has talked to them about getting a 10th win. It seems like it's resonated to at least some degree to the players. I don't know how worked up they are really about that. Whenever we talk to them about it, they're yeah, coach has said that. And I think some guys are hanging on to that and want that. But they want to finish the season strong. And we were talking to Greg Penn yesterday, especially on the defensive side, they really want to be able to get some of the sour taste out of their mouth a little bit as they head into 2024. And that, as we talk about the off season, and being able to kind of get through the off season in a more positive, with more positive chatter around you, you can kind of do that if you play, better in this game. And at least in their own minds, the defensive players, especially because, a fair number of them are coming back, and we'll see, exactly who ends up all returning and who leaves and such. But, at least they're at linebacker, you've got Greg Penn coming back, you've got Whit Weeks coming back. And we've talked to those two here a couple times recently. And, they're upset about how this season went defensively. They know they didn't play up to what they needed to. And it seems like they really want to try to use this as kind of a building block heading into 2024. And in that way, it does matter somewhat, but it's still not, you don't have a championship at stake. So it's not a massive deal if they don't win.
Red?
I'll say it's a 6.5 out of 10. I'm going to go just a little bit more important than Wilson. No, you're right. It's not the other games we're going to see on New Year's Day. It's the first game of the day, New Year's Day. The games later in the day in the Sugar Bowl and the Rose Bowl are obviously vastly more important, but you're trying to get there, and an expanded playoff next year. And again, starting next year, it's going to be pass-fail every year for a program like LSU. Did you make the playoff or did you not? In fact, it's going to be less important, I think, to some fans. Did you win the SEC? It's did you make the playoff or not? Because you're gonna have to be in that number. And it's big. Momentum is a real thing in sports. And I think it didn't help LSU against Florida State, but beating Purdue like a drum in the Citrus Bowl. But it can help you, and it certainly can help you from a confidence standpoint with these changes that we're talking about, and maybe there'll be more changes on the defensive side of the ball with the coaching staff. But this is the one level of football where there's no preseason game. There's jamborees in high school, and there's preseason games in the NFL. And college football, you just have to start like that. And the fact that Brian Kelly mentioned it, they're 13th of 15 bowl practices. That's an extra spring.
Yeah,
and that's big. That coaches love that.
Which the defense maybe could use.
Oh well, they could use. Twice as many, but it's also big to have that real live action, and for Garrett Nussmeier and maybe he develops. We're assuming Kyron Lacey's coming back.
He's already said that he's coming back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's maybe you develop that little bit more chemistry and timing and anticipating. I throw the ball to that spot, and he's going to turn, and he's going to be there for the ball, and that's huge. And that could mean the difference between winning or losing against USC in Las Vegas, and that win or loss could be the difference between making the playoff or not next year. So it all adds up. It's the little things. And this is a little thing this is a minor bowl compared to the Sugar and the Rose, where teams are playing to get to the national championship game. But obviously the goal for everyone is to get there. And this is a game that could help LSU get there a little bit. And, show to recruits, it's a program of stability. It's on the rise. We were talking to Shea Dixon from On3, and reminding us that just 2 years ago, 38 scholarship players, 38 39, whatever, for the Texas Bowl.
38,
and they're still
available. Right. Yeah. They had in the 50s.
They're still overcoming that. And there's still some deficiencies at some key positions that they're still not completely recovered from. And so, they're trying to build up and get there. And this is a game that can help them get there. But if they lose, you can also say it's not the end of the world. It's almost a win-win for LSU. It's not the end of the world. Hey, we got new guys. Jayden Daniels wasn't here. What do you want us to do? Offensive coordinator left. What do you want us to do? So, but I think there's a lot of positives that can be there for LSU if the game turns out in their favor, and of course they're favored to win. I think they will.
And just as a note, to maybe further a little bit of discussion. Like you mentioned, having these bowl practices, some guys who maybe have benefited from these bowl practices. We talked to, Whit Weeks. He sounds like Greg Penn was saying he's going to play a lot in this game. And that's somebody who is probably kind of got the inside track to be your starting weak side linebacker next year. So you kind of get a preview of him. Deshaun Womack, he might have a little bit more of an expanded role in this game.
Right.
Jackson Howard is somebody who is redshirting, only played in 4 games in the regular season in order to maintain that. But he's going to have a chance to play in this game. I saw him getting run with the first team defense a little bit today, rotating in there at that jack linebacker spot. And with Obi Agofu moving on after this season because he'll have exhausted his eligibility, Jackson kind of slides up right behind Braden Swinson, most likely, as that number 2 at jack linebacker. And we'll kind of see if maybe Deshaun Womack is in the mix there too because of his ability to kind of play both there and the big defensive end spot. So, you got guys like that. You've got, the freshman corners, Javian Toviano and Ashton Stamps. Like we've said, playing with the first team right now, getting some more run. Kylan Jackson, a guy who only played in 4 games, it was injured kind of the first 2/3 of the season. He's able to play in this game and not burn his red shirt. And Brian Kelly mentioned him by name today. And so, these are some guys who have gotten to play in the bowl practices and maybe set themselves up going into next season for maybe some expanded roles, some more significant playing time. Sheldon Sampson is another one of those who I don't expect to maybe see a lot of him in this game because you've got Brian Thomas and Kyron Lacey and Malik Neighbors, unless those guys don't play a lot in this game, otherwise Shelton's probably not going to play a ton. But it sounds like he's, done some good things for himself here in bowl prep, and he's been with the second team offense. He's the only freshman receiver who's really with that second team offense right now. And so, or at least even listed on the 2 deep. And so, you've got guys like that who've been able to maybe move their way up the depth chart and start to propel themselves into 2024 as a result of these bowl practices.
So, with that in mind, what happens on Monday, gentlemen? Predictions from both of you. Wilson, you go first.
I've got LSU winning 30-20. I think that here's the. Oh yeah, you know how we played before I give the rest of my answer. You know how we played that over/under game a few weeks ago?
Sure did.
All right, I got one more for you guys. Jay Bramblett has not punted in a game more than 3 times this season. Over/under 4 punts for Jay Bramblett.
Over.
Okay.
I tend to probably agree. I think I might take the over on that. I feel like LSU's offense starts maybe a little bit clunky here and there, but I feel like it's going to eventually find its footing as long as as long as Garrett Nussmeier is just getting the ball to these receivers on the outside and letting them play and run after the catch. If LSU's putting them in a position to make plays in space, I think LSU will win. And it feels like Wisconsin just doesn't have the firepower offensively, especially with running back Braylon Allen opting out. LSU, we said that their backup running back is a bowling ball with the term that he used, and they're still going to be physical and have to tackle to the ground. But it just doesn't feel like they're going to be able to expose LSU's weaknesses on the defensive side like other teams have been able to at times this year. So I've got LSU winning this game and eventually in the end, by 2 scores.
Reb?
I think LSU wins, but I don't think they're going to cover. I think it was 10 points last time I saw it. 31-23. Wilson said there's going to be some times the offense sputters a little bit. It's not a lock for LSU to win. I saw Oklahoma turn the ball over 6 times last night against Arizona. So if LSU gives Wisconsin some short fields and some opportunities, and Nussmeier throws a couple of picks, it could be a bad day for LSU. But I think if they keep it pretty clean, that the LSU wins. And it's not easy. It's not certainly not going to be anything that resembles, in my opinion, the Citrus Bowl last year against Purdue. But it's going to be a win for LSU, and they go into the offseason with some confidence and momentum, and knowing that they beat a solid team, not a great Big Ten team by any means, but a solid team from a solid conference.
LSU will head into the offseason one way or the other after Monday, and these two gentlemen will head back home, and we'll be back in the studio at some point after that to wrap up LSU's win, loss, or one way or the other. We'll be here to wrap up their season and to see what exactly lies ahead. So with that in mind, we should close this thing out. Obviously, as always, we ask you to subscribe to The Advocate. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Stay up to date with all the LSU news delivered straight to your inbox, to your phone, to your desktop. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday, typically every Monday and Thursday on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. You can catch us live there on Monday and Thursday. And if you don't catch us live, you can catch us there after the fact. And if you don't catch us either of those places, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. The holiday season, the gift-giving season has come and gone, but it doesn't mean you can't decorate a little bit and give the LSU fan in your life a little bit of extra gift here with the championship posters or with the Heisman Trophy posters that we've got available at our Advocate store. To do that, you go to store.theadvocate.com. And you can enter the code INSIDER for 15% off your purchase. And as always, we are brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more about Champion Wealth Strategies, to learn more about Champion Wealth Strategies, you go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Enjoy the Rab. I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't see you join this podcast with the white sunblock stuff on your nose, big straw hat, and a Hawaiian shirt.
I thought of doing this out by the pool. I really did.
You really
but
should have.
It could be a little cold for that. But if we podcast next week, I'm still going to be in Florida next Thursday, so you might you would see the sunblock then.
Fair enough. Everybody's going to have to tune in, wait with bated breath to find out what Raz's wearing and where he's going to be, whether he's going to be poolside or stuck in a hotel room somewhere. Gentlemen, we appreciate you chiming in from Tampa, Florida. Enjoy the food, enjoy the weather, enjoy the game. We'll be back here. We'll see you on the other side. For Wilson Alexander and for Scott Rabalais, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.